Welcome to the Riddles and Secrets of History channel. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new stories. In the official text of the New Testament, in a book recognized by all Christian churches, there is a hidden, direct reference to a work that was later diligently erased from this very canon and condemned to oblivion. This is not a conspiracy theory, but a documented fact. The short epistle of Jude quotes a prophecy that is not found in any book of the Old Testament. So, what is this mysterious text? Why did the apostles and early Christians consider it sacred, only for it to be declared a dangerous heresy and nearly all its copies destroyed just a few generations later? And what if the commonly accepted story of the origin of evil, the tale of Adam, Eve, and the serpent, is only part of the truth? What if the real first war for the souls of humanity was lost not by man, but by the angels themselves? And what if we are still feeling the consequences of this defeat today? And what if the details of this catastrophe were deliberately hidden? To understand all this, we will embark on a journey through a world of ancient secrets, forgotten wars, and forbidden knowledge. So, make yourselves comfortable, because thanks to our lecture for sleep, you're guaranteed to fall asleep. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. We will be talking about the most dangerous text in history, about a book that was supposed to disappear but survived. And our investigation will begin with the very clue that led to it, with the enigmatic quote hidden in the pages of the New Testament. Within the New Testament, among the well-known Gospels and the extensive epistles of the Apostle Paul, there is a very small, often overlooked text. This is the Epistle of St. Jude. Short, only one chapter long, it contains a passionate warning to believers against false teachers. And here, in the 14th and 15th verses of this canonical, that is, officially recognized by the Church, text, the author does something completely out of the ordinary. He provides a direct quote, citing the authority of an ancient prophet. It reads as follows: Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about them, see, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone, and to convict all the ungodly of all the ungodly acts they have committed in their ungodliness. This raises a perfectly reasonable question that must have perplexed many thoughtful theologians over the centuries. If this is a quote, where is the original source? It would be logical to assume that the apostle is quoting one of the books of the Old Testament, perhaps the prophet Isaiah or Jeremiah, or maybe the Psalms. But a thorough search of the entire corpus of Old Testament texts yields absolutely nothing. Such words simply do not exist anywhere in it. This creates a paradoxical situation. A sacred, divinely inspired text of the New Testament refers to the authority of another text that does not exist in the Bible itself. It's like an official document with a reference to a secret appendix, but the appendix itself has been destroyed. How could the Apostle Jude have known these words, and what was this book that he considered important enough to quote alongside Holy Scripture, but which subsequent generations decided to diligently remove from circulation? The answer to this question takes us deep into history, into the labyrinths of forgotten libraries and quiet monastery cells. We are talking about the text known as the Book of Enoch. For the Western Christian world, for all of European civilization, this book was effectively lost for more than 1,500 years. It seemed to have vanished. Of course, some early Christian authors, the so-called church fathers who lived in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, such as Tertullian or Irenaeus of Lyons, knew of its existence, mentioned it, and even quoted it. But then, as the strict biblical canon, the official list of books recognized as sacred, was being formed, the Book of Enoch was left out. It was declared an apocryphal text. The term apocrypha itself originally meant secret or hidden, but over time it acquired a negative connotation, becoming a synonym for something unreliable, forged, and not divinely inspired. And once this label was attached to the book, its fate was sealed. In an era when copying books was a long and incredibly laborious process, no one would waste precious parchment and ink on a text that the official church did not approve of. Old copies deteriorated, and new ones were not made. Gradually, the Book of Enoch disappeared from libraries, from theological disputes, and from memory. It became a legend, a ghost, a footnote in the margins of history. It seemed the world had forever lost this strange and inconvenient text. However, history loves unexpected twists. Our narrative shifts from the era of early Christianity to a completely different world, the 18th century, the Age of Enlightenment, great geographical discoveries, and an insatiable thirst for knowledge. The main hero of this part of the story is a man named James Bruce. He was a colorful figure, a Scottish aristocrat, traveler, diplomat, a man of gigantic stature and indomitable energy. His main passion and life's goal was to find the source of the Blue Nile, a mystery that had captivated European minds since antiquity. In 1768, Bruce embarked on his grand journey, which eventually led him to Abyssinia, modern-day Ethiopia. At that time, Ethiopia was a complete mystery to Europe, a Christian empire, lost in the heart of Africa and surrounded by hostile peoples. Christianity had arrived in these lands incredibly early, in the 4th century, and had developed in relative isolation from the rest of the Christian world, from both Rome and Constantinople. Thanks to this isolation, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved many ancient traditions, rites, and, most importantly for our story, texts that had long been forgotten or rejected in the rest of the world. James Bruce spent several years in Ethiopia. He studied local languages, including the ancient liturgical language of Guizi, won the favor of the imperial court, and gained access to ancient monastery libraries. It was there, in the cool silence of the high mountain monasteries, among ancient manuscripts, that he made a discovery that was perhaps even more significant than his search for the source of the Nile. He discovered that the legendary Book of Enoch, lost to Europe, not only existed in Ethiopia but was part of their official biblical canon. For Ethiopian Christians, it was as sacred a book as Genesis or the Psalms. It had never disappeared, it was not declared apocryphal, and it was carefully copied from generation to generation. Bruce managed to acquire several complete manuscript copies of the Book of Enoch. In 1773, he returned to Europe, bringing with him not only maps of the source of the Blue Nile but also a real treasure, a literary time bomb. At first, the academic and theological world treated his find with enormous skepticism. Many believed it was a forgery, perhaps written by Bruce himself or some medieval monk. The very idea that a text known for 1,500 years only through fragmentary references could suddenly materialize as a complete, voluminous book seemed too fantastic. But a detailed study of the manuscripts, their translation into European languages, and subsequent discoveries, particularly the discovery of fragments of the Book of Enoch in Aramaic among the famous Dead Sea Scrolls in the 20th century, finally confirmed it. This was an authentic ancient text. A text that was read by Jews in the Second Temple period. A text that was well known to the first Christians, the apostles, and the authors of the New Testament. The exile had returned home. The ghost had taken on flesh, and with its return, the main question that is the central theme of our lecture today was back on the agenda with new force. We are going to find out what is contained in the pages of this book, what knowledge, what revelations proved to be so inconvenient, so dangerous, that they first needed to be excluded from the canon and then an attempt made to consign them to oblivion. Is the Book of Enoch just one of many collections of ancient myths and legends, a fanciful fantasy reflecting the beliefs of its era, or does it contain the key to a completely different, alternative understanding of the fundamental questions of existence? A key to understanding the origin of evil, the true role of angelic forces in human history, and perhaps even the real reasons for the Great Flood, which in this version of events looks very different from what we are used to thinking. This book offers a different lens, a different perspective on all of sacred history. It tells of events that unfolded behind the scenes of the visible world, in the celestial spheres and in antediluvian times. It narrates a cosmic drama, the consequences of which humanity still feels to this day. It is this alternative version of reality, detailed and claiming divine revelation, that made the Book of Enoch the most dangerous text in history. A text that doesn't so much refute official doctrine as it supplements it with details that change everything, absolutely everything. And to understand the essence of this danger, we must first look inside the book itself, understand its structure, and meet its main character. The Book of Enoch is not a single, linear narrative written from beginning to end by one author. It would be more correct to call it a collection, an anthology, or, if you will, a kind of library in one book. Modern scholars agree that it is a composite work, that is, compiled from several previously independent parts, which were probably written at different times by different people or groups of people, and then united under the common name of the forefather Enoch to give them greater authority. Traditionally, 5 main sections are identified in the text. Each has its own style, theme, and, apparently, its own purpose. The first and perhaps most famous part, occupying chapters 1 to 36, is called the Book of the Watchers. It is here that the very core of the dangerous knowledge is laid out, the story of the descent of angels to earth, their unions with mortal women, and the catastrophic consequences of this union. This is the core of the entire narrative. The very catalyst that triggers the entire subsequent chain of events, including the decision for a worldwide flood. The second part, chapters 37 to 71, is known as the Book of Parables or the Parables of Enoch. This part is noticeably different in tone. It is more messianic and eschatological, that is, focused on the coming end of times and the figure of the future judge. Here appears a mysterious character called the Son of Man, the Elect One, and the Righteous One. Many of his attributes and descriptions are strikingly reminiscent of how Jesus would later be described in the New Testament, which, of course, has generated and still generates countless theological disputes. It is noteworthy that this particular messianic part of the Book of Enoch was not found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, which leads some scholars to suggest its later origin. The third section, chapters 72 to 82, is completely out of step with the general series. It is called the Book of the Heavenly Luminaries or the Astronomical Book. This text reads less like a prophecy and more like a detailed astronomical and calendrical treatise. It scrupulously describes the movements of the sun and moon through the heavenly gates, the phases of the moon, and the structure of seasons and months. The author of this section tries to create a perfect, harmonious solar calendar of 364 days, which, in his opinion, is the only correct one established by God. One can see in this not just a scientific interest, but a deep religious idea. A correct calendar means correct observance of festivals, and therefore, correct worship. An incorrect calendar, accordingly, introduces chaos into the sacred order. The fourth part, occupying chapters 83 to 90, is the Book of Dreams. It presents 2 prophetic visions that Enoch received in his youth. The first vision predicts the coming flood. The second, much larger and more complex, is known as the Apocalypse of Animals. In it, the entire history of the world, from creation to the final judgment, is presented as an allegory where different peoples and their leaders are represented as various animals and birds. It is a kind of encrypted panorama of world history from the author's point of view. And finally, the fifth section, chapters 91 to 108, is called the Epistle of Enoch. In its tone, it resembles wise teachings and prophetic exhortations. Enoch addresses his descendants, both the righteous and the sinners, warning the latter of the coming judgment and comforting the former with the promise of reward. This part contains the famous teaching of the 2 ways, the path of righteousness and the path of sin, which was a very popular theme in Jewish literature of that period. This whole complex, multi-layered structure tells us that we are not dealing with a simple fairy tale, but a serious attempt to create a comprehensive picture of the world, covering everything from creation and the fall to the laws of planetary motion and the coming end of history. But any library, even such an unusual one, needs a central figure, a thread that ties these seemingly disparate parts together. And that figure, of course, is Enoch himself. Who is he? In the canonical Bible, in the Book of Genesis, only a few strikingly concise and enigmatic lines are dedicated to him. The 5th chapter gives a long genealogy from Adam. And about each patriarch, roughly the same thing is said: he lived so many years, had sons and daughters, and he died. But with Enoch, this monotonous formula breaks down. It says something different about him. Enoch walked faithfully with God, then he was no more, because God took him away. And that's all. No details. He did not experience a physical departure from life like everyone else. God simply took him. This mysterious phrase has stirred imaginations for centuries. Where did God take him? Why? What does it mean to walk with God? The Book of Enoch is, in essence, a grandiose, expanded commentary on this single biblical verse. It fills this gap, transforming Enoch from a fleeting mention in a genealogy into one of the central figures of the prehistoric era. According to this book, Enoch, the 7th patriarch from Adam, was a man of exceptional righteousness. And for this righteousness, he was granted a unique destiny. He became the first human allowed to journey beyond the earthly world during his lifetime. He could be called the first cosmonaut or astral traveler in human history. Led by angels, particularly the archangel Uriel, he passes through all 7 heavens. He is shown the structure of the universe, the heavenly storehouses where snow, frost, dew, and rain are kept. He sees the foundations of the earth and the cornerstones of the heavens. The secrets of the movements of the luminaries are revealed to him. He is shown the places prepared for the souls of the righteous and the terrible fiery abyss awaiting sinners and fallen angels. But Enoch is not just a passive tourist on this celestial grand tour. He is a scholar, a chronicler. He writes everything down. God entrusts him with the mission of becoming the keeper of secret knowledge and passing it on to his descendants. He becomes a mediator between the world of humans and the world of angels, and even between God and the fallen angels. In this role, he is utterly unique. He is not a prophet in the classical sense, like Moses or Elijah, not a leader or a king. He is more like the first intellectual, the first scholar, to whom divine revelation is given not in the form of vague visions or commandments, but in the form of a detailed lecture on cosmology, ethics, and eschatology. He is the one who gained access to the blueprints of the universe and was tasked with making copies for humanity. It is this status as one initiated into the highest mysteries that makes him the ideal narrator for the drama that unfolds in the pages of the book. And for any drama, besides the main hero, other characters are needed. And here we come to the key figures of this narrative, those whose actions caused the entire catastrophe. We are talking about angels, but not just any angels, but a specific order of them, which in the book are called the Watchers, in ancient Hebrew, Iron. These are not mere heavenly messengers. In the concept of the Book of Enoch, the Watchers are powerful angelic beings who were initially assigned a very specific mission: to observe the young human race, to protect it, to guide it. In essence, they were appointed as the heavenly curators, the mentors of Earth. This idea that different elements and nations are overseen by special angelic forces was quite common in ancient Judaism. But the Book of Enoch gives this idea a tragic and sinister dimension. The Watchers were endowed with immense power, knowledge, and, most importantly, free will. They were part of the divine world order, the elite of the heavenly host. Besides them, higher angelic ranks also act in the book: the archangels, such as Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel. They remain loyal to God and later act as the executors of His will, a kind of heavenly special forces that will have to clean up the consequences of the activities of their fallen brethren. This creates a picture of a complex, hierarchical heavenly society in which not only loyalty and service are possible, but also conspiracies, rebellions, and betrayal. Thus, by the beginning of the main narrative, we have all the necessary elements. There is a stage, the young, antediluvian world. There is a main character, the righteous Enoch, chosen to travel through the heavens and record what he sees. And there are powerful entities, the Watchers, whose original purpose to guard and instruct is about to turn into its complete opposite. Everything is ready for the first act of the cosmic tragedy to unfold on Mount Hermon, a tragedy that will forever change the fate of both heaven and earth. And this upcoming event, the very essence of the narrative about the rebellious angels, did not come from nowhere. The idea of a violation of cosmic order and of forbidden knowledge is a direct reflection of the world, the anxieties, and the questions that concern the people who created this text. Therefore, before we delve into the details of the transgression itself, let's turn to the historical environment that gave birth to this story. Our path leads to Judea during the period that historians call the Second Temple era. This is a rather long period, beginning around 516 BC, when the Jews who returned from Babylonian exile rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem, and ending in 70 AD, when that same temple was destroyed by the Romans, almost 6 centuries. It was a time of incredible turmoil, great hopes, and deep disappointments. During this period, Judea was rarely completely independent. It was constantly under the rule of successive great empires, first the Persian, then the Greek kingdoms of the Ptolemies and Seleucids, and finally, under the iron heel of Rome. Constant foreign domination and cultural pressure, especially from the Hellenistic world with its philosophy, science, and a completely different pantheon of gods, created enormous tension in Jewish society. It was a time of intense theological searching and ferment. The old, established answers to the main questions of existence were no longer satisfactory. The main of these questions, agonizing and persistent, was the question of the nature and origin of evil. Why is the world so unjust? Why does God's chosen people suffer under the yoke of pagans? Why do the righteous often live in poverty and persecution, while wicked rulers and their minions prosper? The classic answer, provided by the earlier biblical tradition, was that suffering is punishment for sins, for not observing the covenant. But this answer became less and less convincing when people saw that it was precisely those who tried their best to live righteously who were suffering. It was in this atmosphere of spiritual crisis and intense searching that a special literary genre was born and flourished, apocalyptic literature. The word apocalypse in our modern understanding is firmly associated with the end of the world and global catastrophes, but its original Greek meaning is revelation, the unveiling of a mystery. Apocalyptic texts are, in essence, literature of revelation. Their authors sought to explain current suffering and injustice by revealing to their readers a secret divine plan, showing that behind the visible chaos of history lies an invisible struggle of cosmic forces, and that at the end of time, God will surely intervene, judge evil, and reward the righteous. The Book of Enoch is one of the earliest and most vivid examples of this genre. It fits perfectly into this context. It provides its own unique and detailed answer to the question of the origin of evil. To formulate this answer, its authors, like any thinkers of their era, drew not only on their own tradition but also on the vast cultural melting pot in which the entire ancient Near East was simmering. The idea that certain divine or semi-divine beings descend from heaven to earth, enter into close relationships with humans, and share sacred knowledge with them was not an invention of the authors of the Book of Enoch. This motif, in various forms, is found in many cultures of the ancient world. Let's look at a couple of prominent examples. Echoes in ancient myths. Let's transport ourselves to ancient Mesopotamia, to the civilization of the Sumerians and Akkadians, long before the Book of Enoch was written. In their mythology, there were wondrous creatures known as the Apkallu. These were 7 sages, described as half-human, half-fish, who emerged from the waters of the Persian Gulf in time immemorial, even before the Great Flood. According to the myths, it was the Apkallu who brought the foundations of civilization to humanity. They taught people how to build cities, write laws, practice agriculture, and create art and crafts. They were divine teachers, cultural heroes, and their mission was seen as an unconditional good, a gift from higher powers to a wild and ignorant humanity. Note the key parallels: they were supernatural beings who came into the world before the flood and gave knowledge to people. But in the Mesopotamian version, this story has a completely positive spin. Now let's look to the west, to the world of ancient Greece. Here we find the famous myth of the Titan Prometheus. Prometheus, whose name means forethought, seeing the wretched existence of humans who lacked reason and fire, decides to take a desperate step. He sympathizes with humanity. Against the will of the supreme god Zeus, who wanted to keep humans in ignorance, Prometheus steals a spark of divine fire from Olympus and gives it to mortals. Fire here is a symbol not only of warmth and light but also of reason, technology, arts, everything that distinguishes humans from animals. For this act of mercy towards people, Prometheus is subjected to a terrible punishment. Zeus chains him to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, where an eagle comes every day to peck at his liver, which grows back overnight. The story of Prometheus is much closer to what we read in the Book of Enoch. Here too, there is an act of transferring divine knowledge to people. And this act is a violation of the will of the supreme deity and results in severe punishment for the violator. However, the key difference lies in the motivation. Prometheus acts out of compassion for humanity. He is a benefactor, albeit one who broke a prohibition. His gift of fire is ultimately a boon for people, the foundation of their development. The authors of the Book of Enoch take this common narrative framework of the ancient world, supernatural beings sharing knowledge with humans, and give it a completely dark, pessimistic, and tragic twist. In their version, this act is neither a blessing, as in the case of the Apkallu, nor a dual act of compassion and rebellion, as with Prometheus. In the Book of Enoch, the transfer of knowledge becomes an act of pure selfishness, lust, and pride, and the knowledge itself turns out to be not creative, but destructive. The problem of evil and the origin of demons. This brings us to the main question: why, specifically in Second Temple Judea, did this ancient story receive such a negative interpretation? Why was it necessary here to create a text in which evil is not just the result of a wrong human choice, as in the story of Adam and Eve, but something actively brought into the world from the outside by powerful supernatural forces? The answer seems to lie in that same historical context. When your people are subjugated, when a foreign culture is encroaching from all sides, and the world is full of violence and injustice that you are powerless to stop, the idea that the root of evil lies deeper than just in human nature becomes very tempting. A pressing need for a larger-scale explanation arises. The world is not just broken, it is cursed, it is infected. The Book of Enoch offers precisely such a model. It tells its readers, the total evil you see around you, wars, oppression, magic, debauchery, none of it is directly related to that first transgression in the Garden of Eden. These are the consequences of a completely different, later, and far more terrible catastrophe, a cosmic crime committed by the angel watchers. They opened Pandora's box, releasing into the world knowledge that humanity was not ready for and which it immediately used for evil. Moreover, this theory solved another complex theological problem: the origin of demons. The Old Testament does not have a clear and developed demonology. The Book of Enoch fills this gap. It asserts that after the giant offspring of the Watchers and earthly women, the Nephilim, were destroyed, their disembodied spirits remained on earth. It is they who are the evil spirits or demons that have roamed the world ever since, tempting people, pushing them to crime, and bringing disease and suffering. Thus, for the people of that era, the Book of Enoch was not just a collection of myths, it was a kind of all-encompassing cosmic conspiracy theory. It gave a thorough explanation for why the world was so bad. It wasn't just humans who were to blame. Powerful spiritual entities were also at fault, entities that are still invisibly present in the world, continuing their destructive work. This idea, on one hand, might have seemed frightening, but on the other, it also offered hope. For if evil has specific culprits and a specific history, then one day a judgment can come that will put an end to their influence once and for all. This whole charged atmosphere, political humiliation, cultural pressure, and intense theological searching and apocalyptic expectations became the fertile ground from which the Book of Enoch grew. The world was ready to hear the story of how a group of celestial watchers once made a fateful decision that would forever change the course of human history. The conspiracy on Mount Hermon. So, we have understood the tense atmosphere that gave birth to the Book of Enoch. Now, let's return to its own world, to that antediluvian era when humanity was still young. The narrative of the Book of the Watchers, the first and key part of the entire text, begins with a deceptively idyllic picture. Humanity is multiplying, people are spreading across the face of the earth, and daughters are born to them who, as the author emphasizes, were beautiful and comely. Watching this growing civilization from the heavens are those same angel watchers, the sons of heaven. It is at this moment of contemplation that the point of no return is reached. The angels look at the daughters of men and see their beauty, and a desire is born among them, not just a fleeting admiration, but a deep, irresistible attraction that goes against their nature and their mission. They are spirits, celestial beings; humans are creatures of flesh, earthly beings. An insurmountable boundary, established by the Creator himself, lies between their worlds. And a group of watchers decides to violate this boundary. This was not a spontaneous, impulsive act. It was the result of a conspiracy. The initiator of this plot, according to the book, was their leader, an angel whose name was Shemaiah. He gathered his subordinates, who were also chiefs over tens of angels like himself, and addressed them. He voiced what many were apparently already thinking: let us choose wives for ourselves from among the daughters of men and have children. But Shemaiah was not only a tempter but also, strangely enough, a pragmatist. He understood the monstrosity of this plan and feared the consequences. Fear is evident in his speech. He is afraid that the others will back out at the last moment, and then he alone will be held responsible for this great sin. As a leader, he recognizes his responsibility but uses it not to stop the lawlessness, but to involve everyone else, binding them with shared guilt. And so the conspirators make a decision that turns their plan into a formal rebellion against the heavenly order. They decide to seal their intention with an oath. Not just to give their word to each other, but to do something much more serious, to place a mutual curse upon one another. This meant that backing out of the plan became impossible for any of them. They were consciously burning all their bridges. The location chosen for this fateful act was Mount Hermon, located in the north of ancient Israel. And this choice itself is deeply symbolic. The name Hermon is very similar to the ancient Hebrew word herem, which means a curse, a ban, or something completely devoted to destruction. Thus, the very name of the setting contains a hint of its tragic essence. On the Mount of the Curse, they swore an oath that cursed both themselves and the entire world. The Book of Enoch reports their number with protocol-like precision. A total of 200 angels participated in the conspiracy. This was not a handful of renegades, but an entire unit of the heavenly host. The text even lists the names of their leaders, the chiefs of tens: Shemaiah, the main one, then Arakiba, Ramiel, Kokabeel, Tamiel, Ramiel, Danel, Ezekiel, Barakajel, Asel, Armoros, Beterel, Ananel, Zakiel, Samsapiel, Sadarel, Turel, Jamjel, and Sariel. This long list of names is not just a literary device. For the ancient reader, it gave the narrative the appearance of a reliable document, almost a legal testimony, recording the names of the main criminals. And so, having bound themselves with an unbreakable oath, these 200 watchers descend from heaven to earth. They come to the daughters of men, enter into unions with them, and from that moment, an irreversible process of corruption and destruction begins. The two corrupting gifts, biology and technology. Their crime essentially has two main aspects, two directions along which the infection of sin begins to spread throughout the world. The first aspect is biological. The Watchers violate the fundamental law of creation by mixing spiritual and corporeal natures. From their unions with earthly women, offspring are born, but these are no ordinary children. Giants, called Nephilim in the book, come into the world. This word is sometimes translated as the fallen ones or those who cause others to fall. They were creatures of monstrous height and inhuman strength, demigods, half-human, who carried the destructive imprint of their parents' unnatural union. Their appearance on earth was the first horrifying consequence of the angelic rebellion. But there was a second, perhaps even more destructive, aspect of their crime. The Watchers did not just satisfy their desires, they brought knowledge with them to earth. But this was not the kind of knowledge that was meant to help humanity develop in harmony. These were secret, forbidden arts for which people were not ready. In essence, it was an act of cosmic-scale information sabotage. The Book of Enoch describes in great detail which of the fallen angels taught what to humans. The main teacher, the chief purveyor of forbidden technologies, is an angel named Azazel. His role in this drama is so great that in some passages, he even overshadows Shemaiah and is presented as the main culprit for all that happened. It was Azazel who taught men to work metals, but not for plows and hoes. He taught them to forge swords, knives, daggers, shields, and breastplates. He gave humanity weapons and the art of warfare. Before this moment, conflicts between people may have existed, but now they acquired a completely different, deadly, and organized character. Along with weapons, mass violence came into the world. But Azazel did not stop there. He also taught people the art of adornment. He showed them how to make bracelets, necklaces, and other luxury items. He also revealed the secret of cosmetics to women, how to use kohl to line the eyes to make them seem more expressive, and how to use various minerals and plants to color the face. At first glance, this might seem harmless, but for the author of the book, this was as much a sin as the creation of weapons. Why? Because cosmetics and jewelry were seen as tools of deceit, creating an artificial appearance to arouse lust. They taught people to value external, illusory beauty over inner substance. It was the art of seduction, which led to debauchery. Other fallen angels also made their contributions to humanity's enlightenment. Shemaiah, their leader, taught people spells and the art of cutting roots for sorcery. Armoros taught the art of breaking spells. Barakajel taught astrology, observing the stars to foretell the future. Kokabeel taught the meaning of signs. Tamiel taught astronomy. And Asaradel taught the course of the moon. Let's understand why this knowledge was considered forbidden. Take astrology, for example. In the ancient world, observing the stars, astronomy, was an important science, necessary for calendars and agriculture. The righteous Enoch himself, as we remember from the Book of the Heavenly Luminaries, studies the movement of the planets in detail. But astrology is different. It is an attempt not just to observe the divine order, but to penetrate the divine plan, to know the future, to circumvent the Creator's will. It was a usurpation of a divine prerogative. The same applies to magic. Instead of praying to God and relying on His will, people received tools with which they tried to manipulate reality themselves, to subordinate spiritual forces to their will. Thus, unlike the classic story of the fall of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, the original sin here looks completely different. There, evil came into the world because humans took what was forbidden to take, the fruit from the tree of knowledge. Here, evil flooded the world because angels gave humans what was forbidden to give, a whole arsenal of destructive technologies and occult knowledge. What was the true motivation of the Watchers? On the surface lies simple lust, which was the trigger. But if you dig deeper, other motives emerge. There is undoubtedly pride, the desire to become creators themselves, to create their own lineage on earth, their own dynasty of demigods. Perhaps there was also envy of humans, of their capacity for physical intimacy and procreation, which the angels lacked. But the main motive that binds everything together is rebellion. A conscious, well-planned rebellion against the order established by God. The Watchers did not just violate one prohibition, they encroached on the very foundations of creation, on the separation of worlds, on the divine monopoly on sacred knowledge, and on the natural course of human history. They decided that they knew better than the Creator how humanity should develop and tried to accelerate this process, to force it. And this act of arrogance, this crime committed on Mount Hermon, became the catalyst that turned a young and relatively innocent world into an arena of bloody chaos. The reign of the giants. The consequences were not long in coming. They were not delayed or purely spiritual. They manifested immediately, in the very flesh and blood of creation. The earthly women who had entered into unions with the angels conceived and gave birth to offspring. But these were not ordinary human children. Creatures called Nephilim or giants came into the world. The text describes their nature with frightening specificity. Their height, it is claimed, reached 3,000 cubits. Of course, this number should not be taken literally. It would be an unimaginable, geological height. Rather, it is hyperbole, meant to convey their monstrous, superhuman nature. They were an anomaly, a biological error, the product of a broken order. Their physical power far exceeded that of any human. They were the living embodiment of their father's sin, powerful, beautiful, and utterly empty inside. The main driving force of these creatures, their defining characteristic, was an insatiable, all-consuming hunger. Their gigantic bodies required a colossal amount of energy. At first, they turned their gaze to what humanity produced. They began to devour everything, the fruits of human labor, the harvests from the fields, the stores in the granaries, everything people had gathered for themselves. But this was not enough. Their appetite was bottomless. When human resources were exhausted, the giants turned to the animal world. They began to exterminate livestock, wild beasts, birds in the sky, and even fish in the water. But even this could not satisfy them. And then, the final, most terrible transition occurred. Having exhausted all other food sources, the Nephilim turned against their own creators, against humans. They began to hunt them, to devour their flesh and drink their blood. The world, which had recently seemed young and full of hope, was rapidly plunging into a primeval horror, into an era of total predation where man, once the crown of creation, had become prey. But even this was not the limit. The giants' appetite was so great, and their nature so corrupt, that they eventually began to attack each other. The era of the giants became an era of widespread cannibalism. The earth was filled with violence. The very forbidden knowledge that the fallen Watchers had brought was now working at full force. Armed with swords and daggers, humans and giants exterminated each other. Sorcery and spells taught by the angels were used to inflict harm. The world turned into an arena of bloody chaos where there was no law, no order, only the rule of the strong. And the earth, as the author of the book writes, was defiled. It groaned under the weight of the shed blood and lawlessness. This groan did not go unheard. The Book of Enoch describes how the cry of oppressed humanity and of the earth itself rose to the heavens. And from the celestial heights, the angels loyal to God, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, watched what was happening. They saw the streams of blood covering the earth, they saw the lawlessness committed by the fallen watchers and their monstrous offspring. And they, as faithful servants, brought this information to the throne of the Most High. Their report is not just a statement of fact, but a clear indictment. They say to God, "You see what Azazel has done? He has taught all unrighteousness, and revealed the eternal secrets which were in heaven." They also point to Shemaiah, who taught people sorcery. They list all the crimes, the unions with women, the birth of giants, teaching people violence and debauchery. The loyal angels act as celestial prosecutors, demanding justice. And against this backdrop of universal chaos and impending divine judgment, one of the most surprising and paradoxical episodes of the entire book unfolds. The fallen watchers, seeing the consequences of their actions and likely sensing the inevitable retribution, begin to feel fear. Their initial pride and self-assurance give way to despair. They understand there is no way back. They are cut off from God. Their crime is too great for them to directly appeal to Him for forgiveness. And so, they decide on an unprecedented step. They turn for help to a mortal, to Enoch, the same righteous man they may not have even noticed among the masses of people before. Now he, a man of flesh and blood, becomes their last hope. The leaders of the fallen come to him. It is a striking scene. Powerful angelic beings, who not long ago considered themselves entitled to control the fate of humanity, now stand before a man in tears and trembling. They ask him, a simple mortal, to be their mediator, their intercessor before God. They ask him to compose a petition for mercy for them and take it to heaven. An incredible role reversal occurs. It is not an angel who is a messenger for a man, but a man who must become a messenger for angels. Enoch, despite the monstrosity of their crimes, agrees to help them. He is a righteous man, and perhaps in his heart there is a place for compassion even for such fallen creatures. He records their prayer, their petition, in which they repent of their deeds and ask for forgiveness. After this, Enoch goes to the waters of Dan, south of Mount Hermon, and there, while reading their petition, he falls asleep. In a dream, a vision comes to him. He sees himself ascending on clouds into the heavenly courts, directly to the throne of God. And there, in the presence of divine majesty, he reads the petition of the fallen watchers. God's answer is harsh, final, and cannot be appealed. He tells Enoch that there will be no forgiveness. And he pronounces a sentence full of bitter and instructive irony. God tells Enoch to relay to the watchers, "You should be interceding for men, not men for you." With this, he emphasizes the full depth of their fall. They, spiritual beings who were supposed to be mentors and protectors of humanity, have sunk so low that they now need the intercession of those they corrupted. The sentence is detailed and inescapable. First, the fallen watchers will be forced to witness the destruction of what was dearest to them, their children, the giants. They will see their offspring exterminate each other in a fratricidal slaughter. This is the first, psychological part of their punishment. Then, after the death of the Nephilim, the watchers themselves await eternal imprisonment. The archangels will seize them, bind them, and cast them into the abysses of the earth, imprisoned under hills in darkness. There they will remain in confinement until the great day of judgment, until the end of time, when they will be cast into the eternal fire. Their punishment is delayed, but it is inevitable. The Great Flood, a cosmic cleansing. It is in this context that the divine verdict on the fate of the entire world is delivered. Seeing that the earth is defiled, filled with violence, and soaked in blood, God decides on its total purification. He says that He will send a great flood upon the earth, which will destroy all living things. This completely changes our usual understanding of the Great Flood. In the canonical book of Genesis, the flood is primarily a punishment for the moral corruption of humanity itself. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. In the Book of Enoch, human sinfulness is also a factor, but the root cause is different. The flood is not so much a punitive action as a necessary sanitary measure. It is a surgical operation to cleanse the planet of the consequences of angelic interference, of their hybrid offspring and the forbidden knowledge with which they infected humanity. The world is afflicted with a spiritual and genetic blight, and the only way to heal it is through a complete washing, a return to the starting point. In light of this concept, the role of Noah also becomes clearer. He and his family are chosen for salvation not just because they were righteous in their generation. In the context of the Book of Enoch, their righteousness likely implies the purity of their bloodline as well. They are the few whose blood was not mixed with the seed of the fallen angels. They are the pure genetic material from which humanity can be reborn after the great cleansing. But even the flood does not solve the problem completely. The physical world will be cleansed, but what will become of the spirits of the giants? The divine verdict states that after the death of their bodies, their disembodied spirits will go neither to heaven nor to hell. They will remain on earth, and they will become the very evil spirits or demons that will wander the world, bringing sickness, temptation, and misfortune to people, right up until the final judgment. Thus, the era of the giants ends in total catastrophe, but its legacy remains. The world is cleansed by water, but its spiritual atmosphere is forever poisoned by the incorporeal ghosts of antediluvian evil. And this explanation for the origin of demons, as we will see, became one of the most influential and simultaneously one of the most dangerous ideas that the Book of Enoch gave to the world. Influence and popularity, from Qumran to the New Testament. This detailed and dark worldview we have just described, the story of the Watchers' rebellion, the birth of the giants, and the defilement of the earth, did not remain a mere literary exercise or a collection of strange myths. In the turbulent era in which it was created, this story was incredibly sought after. It provided answers, and it provided them for questions to which the official, more restrained tradition did not always give a convincing reply. It explained not just the presence of evil in the world, but its totality, its systemic, all-pervading nature. For many Jews of that time, living under the oppression of successive empires and seeing injustice, violence, and a departure from the covenants of their ancestors all around them, the theory of the Book of Enoch was perfectly logical. The story of Adam and Eve explained why man is inclined to sin. But it did not fully explain why the world itself seems so saturated with evil. Why do entire systems of oppression exist? Why are wars so brutal and temptations so powerful? The Book of Enoch offered a solution. Besides human weakness, there are active, powerful, and malevolent forces at work in the world, the legacy of that very antediluvian crime. This idea allowed them to make sense of their own powerlessness in the face of global evil. Consequently, the text gained enormous popularity. It circulated in numerous manuscripts and was held in high regard by various religious groups. Not by everyone, of course. More conservative and aristocratic circles, like the Sadducees, who only recognized the Pentateuch of Moses as sacred, likely viewed such apocalyptic fantasies with great skepticism. But for many others, especially those who lived in tense anticipation of divine intervention in history, the Book of Enoch became one of the most important spiritual documents. Its influence was so great that it can be clearly traced in the pages of the New Testament. The authors of the New Testament texts, the apostles and their disciples, obviously not only knew this book but also considered it an authoritative source, worthy of quotation and mention alongside the canonical scriptures of the Old Testament. We began our lecture with the most striking example, the direct quote from the Book of Enoch in the Epistle of Jude. Now, knowing the context, let's return to it and appreciate its full significance. Jude writes, "It was also about these that Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied." He doesn't just provide an anonymous quote, he names the author, emphasizes his ancient and authoritative status, the seventh from Adam, and uses the word prophesied, placing him on par with the great biblical prophets. For him and his audience, this was clearly not some dubious apocrypha. It was a genuine prophecy. But the Epistle of Jude is just the tip of the iceberg. Traces of the Book of Enoch's influence are scattered throughout other texts. Let's turn to the epistles of Peter. In his second epistle, chapter 2, there is a completely unambiguous passage. Warning against false teachers, Peter gives examples of divine judgment and says, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell, Tartarus, and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept for judgment." This verse is essentially a brief summary of the story from the Book of the Watchers. Which sinning angels is Peter talking about? There is no detailed story in the canonical Old Testament about a mass fall of angels before the events described in the Book of Enoch. The idea that they are bound in chains of gloomy darkness and held in prison for judgment is a direct, almost verbatim repetition of the sentence God passed on the Watchers through Enoch. Interestingly, in the original Greek of Peter's epistle, the word used for this hell is Tartarus. In ancient Greek mythology, Tartarus is the deepest abyss beneath the earth, the place of imprisonment for the overthrown titans. The use of this specific term shows that the author is drawing a parallel between the rebellion of the Greek titans and the rebellion of the angel watchers. A similar motif is found in the first epistle of Peter. Chapter 3 speaks of how Christ, after his departure from this world, went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey, when God's patience waited in the days of Noah. Again, the question arises, who are these spirits in prison that needed a proclamation? Traditional interpretation struggles to answer. But in light of the Book of Enoch, everything falls into place. These are the very same fallen watchers, imprisoned in the abysses of the earth and awaiting judgment since the time of Noah. The Apostle Peter refers to this story as something self-evident, requiring no further explanation. All these fragments are not just coincidences. They are convincing proof that in the 1st century AD, during the formative period of Christianity, the Book of Enoch was part of the intellectual and spiritual baggage. Its ideas, images, and terminology were so widespread that the authors of the New Testament could freely use them, confident that they would be understood correctly. Confirmation at Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls scroll. For a long time, these New Testament references were the main, yet still indirect, proof of the Book of Enoch's antiquity and influence. Skeptics could argue that perhaps it was the other way around, that a later Christian author composed the Book of Enoch, filling it with motifs from the epistles of Peter and Jude. However, in the mid-20th century, an event occurred that settled this debate and revolutionized biblical studies, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. In 1947, in caves near Qumran on the coast of the Dead Sea, ancient scrolls that had been hidden there for about 2,000 years were accidentally discovered. Subsequent excavations unearthed an entire library belonging, as most scholars believe, to a Jewish religious community known as the Essenes. The Essenes were a kind of Jewish ascetic, or monk. They considered the official Jerusalem temple and its priesthood to be defiled and corrupt, so they withdrew into the desert to lead a strictly righteous life in anticipation of the imminent end of the world and the coming of the Messiah. Among the hundreds of scrolls found in the Qumran caves, scholars, to their astonishment, discovered fragments of the Book of Enoch. And not just one or two scraps, but the remains of at least 11 different scrolls written in Aramaic, the very language spoken in Judea at the time of Jesus. This discovery was of colossal importance. It irrefutably proved that the Book of Enoch was not a late Christian forgery but a genuine Jewish text that existed long before the birth of Christ. The oldest fragments found date back to the 2nd century BC. The number of copies found speaks for itself. In the Qumran library, the Book of Enoch was one of the most popular books, surpassed in manuscript quantity only by pillars of the Old Testament like the Pentateuch, the Book of Isaiah, and the Psalms. This means that for the Essene community, this text was not just important, it was central. The book's ideas perfectly matched their worldview. The Essenes believed the world was divided into two camps, the sons of light, themselves, and the sons of darkness, the rest of humanity. The Book of Enoch gave them the perfect cosmological and historical basis for these beliefs, explaining where evil spirits came from and why the world was so corrupt. The fragments found included the Book of the Watchers, the Book of Dreams, the Epistle of Enoch, and the Book of the Heavenly Luminaries. The last was especially important to the Essenes, as they were obsessed with the idea of a correct calendar and used a 364-day solar calendar, exactly like the one described in Enoch's astronomical book. Even more notable is what was not found at Qumran. Among all the fragments, not a single line from the second part of the Book of Parables, the very section that talks about the Son of Man, was discovered. This fact has led many scholars to conclude that the Book of Parables was likely a later addition to the collection, written in the 1st century AD, perhaps in a Christian or proto-Christian environment. From reverence to rejection, the book's fate in the Church. The influence of the Book of Enoch did not wane with the destruction of the Second Temple. On the contrary, in the first centuries of its existence, young Christianity took up its banner. For early Christian thinkers, whom we now call the Church Fathers, this text became an important tool for explaining complex theological issues, especially those concerning angelology and demonology. For the first 2 to 3 centuries AD, the book enjoyed enormous authority. Tertullian, an influential author from Carthage, not only quoted the book but fiercely defended its authenticity and canonicity. He argued logically that if the Apostle Jude quoted Enoch, then the book must be divinely inspired, otherwise, one would have to reject Jude's own epistle. Other prominent figures like Irenaeus of Lyons and Clement of Alexandria also used it respectfully. For several generations, the story of the fallen watchers was seen not as a myth, but as an integral part of sacred history. However, as Christianity transformed from a persecuted sect into the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, the situation began to change. The Church became more organized and hierarchical, a process that demanded unification and a single, clear doctrine. In this new, orderly system, there was less and less room for the Book of Enoch with its specific and sometimes radical ideas. The text that was once valued for providing answers now became an irritant because those answers created too many new problems. Why was it rejected? Alternative origin of sin, the Orthodox doctrine increasingly focused on Adam and Eve. Their original sin was the root of all evil, and Christ's atonement was the solution. The Book of Enoch downplayed Adam's sin, placing the primary blame for the world's catastrophic state on angels, not humanity. This conflicted with the growing emphasis on human free will and responsibility. Two human angels, the book portrayed angels with lust, envy, and fear, blurring the line between the angelic and human realms. The Church, however, was establishing a clear hierarchy with God at the top, followed by his incorporeal, servile angels. The story of the Watchers introduced an element of chaos into this neat system. Scientific and calendrical issues, the specific cosmology and the 364-day solar calendar became liabilities. They were too concrete and could be disproven by astronomical observations. The Church eventually adopted the Julian calendar, making Enoch's calendar obsolete. The process of canonization, the process of forming the Bible, was one of exclusion, not inclusion. A clear, closed list was needed to combat Gnostic texts. The Book of Enoch, with its complex, multi-part structure, was an inconvenient candidate. Including it would open a Pandora's box of other apocryphal texts. This process of rejection was gradual. Thinkers like Origen in the 3rd century expressed doubts. By the 4th and 5th centuries, theological giants like St. Jerome and St. Augustine definitively classified the Book of Enoch as apocryphal, spurious, and lacking divine authority. Augustine's opinion was particularly influential in the West for the next 1,000 years. Church councils, like the Council of Laodicea, c. 363 AD, began to compile official lists of canonical books to be read in church. The Book of Enoch was not on these lists. Step by step, it was pushed to the margins. From an authoritative source of revelation, it became a dubious apocryphal text. The book that apostles had quoted became a book forbidden to be read. Its danger was neutralized through marginalization and subsequent oblivion. Preservation in Ethiopia and Rediscovery Ethiopia. The sentence passed by theologians and councils became, in practice, a sentence of slow disappearance for the Book of Enoch in the West. By the High Middle Ages, the book had become a ghost, known only from rare quotes in the works of ancient authors. However, while memory of the book was being erased in Europe, a completely different fate awaited it in a distant and isolated part of the Christian world, Ethiopia. Christianity arrived in the Ethiopian kingdom of Aksum incredibly early, in the 4th century. However, its geographical isolation allowed it to preserve many features of early Christianity that were later revised or lost in the rest of the world. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church maintained its own, broader biblical canon. In their tradition, the Book of Enoch never lost its high status. For them, it was not apocryphal, it was an integral part of the Bible, as canonical as Genesis or Psalms. For over 1,000 years, in the quiet of high mountain monasteries carved directly into rock, Ethiopian scribes diligently continued to copy the sacred text, translated into the Guizi language. Ethiopia became a kind of Noah's Ark for this book, preserving it from the flood of oblivion that covered the rest of the Christian world. Finally, after more than a millennium of this quiet, secluded life, the book's hour came again. In the late 18th century, during the Age of Enlightenment, the Scottish explorer James Bruce arrived in Ethiopia. As we mentioned at the very beginning, his main goal was to find the source of the Blue Nile, but he was also deeply interested in the country's history. He knew of the lost Book of Enoch from ancient writings and began to search for it purposefully. One can only imagine his feelings when he realized the legend was real, that the book existed not in fragments, but in complete, well-preserved Guizi manuscripts. It was a discovery of monumental scientific importance. James Bruce managed to acquire 3 complete copies. In 1773, he returned to London, bringing with him not just geographical information, but a true intellectual treasure. The exile had returned. The initial reaction from the European scientific community was, to put it mildly, cool. Many treated Bruce's find with great distrust, believing it to be a medieval forgery. It seemed too incredible that a text the greatest minds of Europe considered lost forever had suddenly been found so easily in distant Africa. It took several decades for skepticism to give way to serious study. The turning point came in 1821, when Oxford University professor Richard Lawrence published the first complete English translation of the Ethiopian manuscript. The Book of Enoch now spoke a modern European language. Scholars and theologians could finally read it from beginning to end, and what they read stunned them. It became perfectly clear that this was not a medieval forgery. The style, the ideas, the theological concepts, everything pointed to deep antiquity, to the world of Second Temple Judaism. Those mysterious allusions in the epistles of the apostles Peter and Jude suddenly made sense. The text fit perfectly into the historical context known from other sources. An era of modern scholarly study of the Book of Enoch had begun. Academics in Germany, France, and England undertook a detailed analysis of the text, comparing it with biblical books and other apocrypha. Gradually, with each new scholarly publication and each new translation into other European languages, the book reclaimed its place in the academic world. It was no longer considered a mere curiosity but was recognized as a crucial historical document, without which it is impossible to understand either the Judaism of Jesus' time or the origins of early Christianity. Thus, the crisis that seemed destined to destroy this text forever resulted in its transformation. Being forgotten in the West led to its preservation in Ethiopia, and its subsequent discovery by Europeans became its second birth. The exile, which had lingered in the shadows for 1,500 years, had returned, and with its return came its ideas. Those same dangerous ideas about fallen angels, the origin of evil, and the hidden mechanisms of world history became accessible once again to a wide readership. The genie was out of the bottle. And now the modern world faced a question: what to do with this resurrected witness from the distant past, and how does its legacy affect us today? The modern legacy, from pop culture to conspiracy. The return of the Book of Enoch to the world of European culture in the 19th and 20th centuries did not, of course, restore the sacred status it held in antiquity. With the exception of the Ethiopian Church, no major Christian denomination or Jewish movement revisited its canons. The doors to official Holy Scripture remained closed to it. It returned not as a prophet, but rather as an invaluable historical witness, a guest from the distant past who could tell us an incredible amount about the world in which Christianity was born. However, ideas, especially ones as powerful and imaginative as those in the Book of Enoch, have a way of seeping through any canonical barriers. Having been exiled from theology, it found a new, incredibly vast niche for itself: modern mass culture. The plots and images that once made Jewish ascetics in the Qumran caves tremble turned out to be perfectly in tune with the sensibilities of the 21st century individual. Let's explore where we encounter the echoes of this ancient book today. Its legacy is everywhere, often in the most unexpected places. The entire modern genre of urban fantasy, with its stories of secret wars between angels and demons unfolding on the streets of our cities, is largely its indirect descendant. The images of fallen angels who descend to earth not out of pride but out of passion or curiosity, the idea of the Nephilim, powerful hybrids of angelic and human nature, the concept of forbidden knowledge granting supernatural powers, all of this has become a goldmine for writers, screenwriters, and game developers. When you watch a movie where the Archangel Gabriel wages war against rebellious angels for the fate of humanity, or play a video game where the protagonist, a half-demon, half-angel, battles the forces of heaven and hell, you are, without realizing it, connecting with the world of the Book of Enoch. This mythology has proven to be incredibly appealing. It is far more dynamic and, one might say, dramatic than the more austere and laconic canonical narratives. It offers a ready-made set of charismatic, morally ambiguous characters, from the tragic rebel Azazel to the mighty Nephilim. It provides ample space for creating entire universes built on the conflict of celestial forces. Television series like Supernatural or Lucifer have exploited these motifs for many seasons, creating complex and intricate mythologies based on the same ancient ideas of heavenly rebellion and its consequences. Even in cinema that seems to be directly adapting biblical stories, the influence of the Book of Enoch can be very noticeable. For example, in Darren Aronofsky's 2014 film Noah, giant stone creatures appear who help the protagonist build the ark. This is a direct reference to the Watchers from the Book of Enoch, who, according to some interpretations, were punished and imprisoned in shells of stone. For many viewers unfamiliar with the source material, the appearance of these creatures seemed like a strange directorial invention, but it was actually an attempt to reconstruct that very Enochian version of the events preceding the flood. But cultural influence is just one, the most superficial, layer of the book's legacy. There is another, much more specific stratum of its modern life. Rejected by official religion and academia as a sacred text, it was enthusiastically embraced by various esoteric, occult, and conspiracy movements. For these groups, the Book of Enoch became not just a historical document, but a key to the hidden truth about the origin of humanity. Its interpretation in light of the so-called theory of paleocontact, or the ancient astronaut theory, has become particularly popular. Proponents of this hypothesis, made famous by authors like Erich von Däniken, suggest reading the ancient text by replacing all religious terminology with science fiction terminology. And with such a reading, the Book of Enoch indeed begins to sound like a report of contact with an extraterrestrial civilization. In this paradigm, the angels or sons of heaven are, of course, aliens who arrived on Earth in their spaceships. The heavens through which Enoch travels are not spiritual realms but outer space or even the interior of a mothership. His ascension is not a mystical experience but an act of abduction by aliens for study. The story of the Watchers descending on Mount Hermon is reinterpreted as the story of a crew or a scientific expedition that violated a non-interference directive regarding the development of a primitive civilization. Their unions with the daughters of men are nothing less than a genetic experiment program to create hybrids. The Nephilim, accordingly, are these very hybrids, possessing anomalous abilities. The forbidden knowledge that the Watchers gave to humans, in this logic, is seen as the transfer of high technology. Teaching metallurgy for making weapons, astronomy, genetics, the art of cutting roots, all of this is presented as gifts from a more advanced civilization which, however, led to catastrophic consequences because humanity was not morally ready for them. The Great Flood, in this case, can be viewed as a deliberate planetary sterilization operation carried out by the main alien civilization to destroy the traces of a failed experiment. This interpretation, of course, has nothing to do with historical science or traditional theology. However, its popularity in certain circles is very telling. It demonstrates how powerful and flexible the narrative created over 2,000 years ago has proven to be. It can accommodate religious, mystical, and even pseudoscientific explanations of the world. It answers the eternal human need for mystery, for the feeling that the official version of history is hiding something, that behind the scenes of the visible world, far more grandiose and important events have occurred and continue to occur. Conclusion: the enduring danger of an alternative reality. So, what is the current status of the book? Let's draw the bottom line. For the academic world, for historians, philologists, and biblical scholars, the Book of Enoch is a priceless primary source. It is a window into the minds of people who lived in one of the most pivotal periods of human history. For most modern believers, both Jewish and Christian, it remains what it was deemed in the 4th century, an apocryphal text. Interesting and important for understanding history, but not divinely inspired. It sits on the bookshelf next to other works of ancient literature, but not on the altar. The exception, as we remember, remains the Ethiopian Church, which continues to revere it as an integral part of its Bible, serving as a living reminder that the boundaries of the canon were not always and everywhere so rigid. And so, at the end of our long discussion, we return to the main question with which we began: what is the real danger of the Book of Enoch? Why has this text earned such a title? After all we have discussed, it becomes clear that its danger lies not in any specific heretical statements, not in its incorrect description of the moon's movement, nor in its controversial theory of the origin of demons. All these are merely symptoms. The true, enduring danger of the Book of Enoch lies in its very existence. It is dangerous because it offers a convincing, detailed, and internally logical alternative reality. It challenges the canonical narrative's monopoly on truth. It tells us that the history of the relationship between heaven and earth may have been far more complex, tragic, and ambiguous than the simplified version that made it into the official textbooks of sacred history. It shows that at the dawn of our civilization, events may have occurred, the memory of which was deliberately erased or edited for the sake of achieving theological clarity and order. Its danger lies in the question it silently poses to every reader: what else don't we know? What other chapters have been torn from this great book? The Book of Enoch is a kind of deleted scene from the movie of creation. And like any good deleted scene, it makes us look at the rest of the film in a new light. It does not so much refute the canon as it undermines the very idea that a canon can be absolutely complete and exhaustive. And this challenge to authority, this doubt in the completeness of the picture, this reminder that any story can have another version, is its main and truly immortal legacy. On that note, our long journey through the pages of one of history's most mysterious books comes to an end. I thank you for your attention and for spending this time together, delving into the secrets of the distant past.